Hello everybody, welcome. You join me on my way to Saltmarshe Hall. Not somewhere I've ever been before or have any affiliation with, but I'm eagerly looking forward to coming here, having been waiting about a month or so. Unfortunately, it's a bit grey and drizzly at the minute, but perhaps that stands us in good stead for what I'm looking to do here. I'm hoping for this to be the first in what I hope to be a series of episodes on Yorkshire wedding venues. It might be that you're planning a Yorkshire wedding and you're looking for venues, or you might already be committed to one and thinking more about planning for photography. Saltmarshe Hall was bought by its current owners 11 years ago and renovated, and they are only the third family in the space of 900 years to own the property. It was actually an estate owned by the same family all the way from 1067 up to the 1970s. It is near Howden and Goole in the East Riding of Yorkshire, or East Yorkshire, depending on what school of thought is yours on that. The property itself, I want to go around and have a look at some of the interior spaces that you might use for a wedding. You might use the morning room for a ceremony indoors. You might use other indoor spaces for reception or for bridal prep. You might be staying in a suite the night before and the night of. We'll also be having a look around the beautiful extensive grounds. There's a walled garden in which you could have an outdoor ceremony, a tree-lined avenue in which you could place your ceremony, or a terrace for an outdoor reception. All Occasions Florists of Howden are dressing the spaces today, so that'll be lovely to see. I'm hoping to grab a few words with them if they are willing. And then I want to have a look at how you might plan to get really beautiful portraits regardless of the light or weather, and how you can do that with ease. So I'll be looking around for outdoor spaces that, if it were a brightly lit day, you could use in a way that some people don't realise. If you're used to thinking that a really bright sunny blue sky day is beautiful, that can be something of a nemesis for a good photographer. What I would be seeking to do there is actually backlight. So I'd be turning you around so that you, if we are using direct sunlight like that, have a really beautiful haloed hair light around your head. We might get some nice deliberate flare, which is technically a mistake, but is beautiful at times. But more importantly, what I'll be teaching you to do in terms of planning, because I think it's useful for you to understand those rationales for the best possible beautiful shots, is that you are going to want to be thinking about being in open shade on a bright sunny day. If you're posing for your photographer, your shadow actually ought to be pointing at the photographer and the sun behind you. And in the open shade of, say, the beautiful gold sandstone of Saltmarshe Hall, you might use the building itself or a wall to create open shade, be standing in that shade, and then use the natural boundary between the shadow from that wall or building and the direct sunlight, stand an inch or two from that, and then you've got some lovely paving that's a natural bounce and reflector for a really beautiful portrait. You might also think about whether you want to isolate yourself with the photographer's style by having a shallow depth of field, whereby you get that lovely, really creamy blurred background, which is something that your phone these days does a really good job of faking. And if you've got a lovely sandstone wall behind you, that might be just the aesthetic that you're looking for. That said, you're also at a really beautiful venue. And whether you want the backdrop of a stately house or foliage or whatever, you might actually want that depth to be a little deeper so that you get more focused context of the beautiful setting that you're in. The aesthetic, of course, is up to you, and there should be, with your photographer, room for all of those styles within a day's photography. We also will have a look at how on a grayer day, it's brightening up right now, so hopefully we'll get something beautiful while we're there. On a grayer day, you might use some of the interior spaces and window light for really beautiful evocative lighting, closing the light down for something moodier, or in places like Saltmarshe's beautiful stairwell, the sort of beautiful window light that you might go for there. So it's about planning for those interior spaces, windows, walls, open shade, natural reflectors that are going to make for really exquisitely beautiful portraiture on your day. Join me there and we'll explore together. So of course I'm whittering on here talking about backdrops and walls and direction of light and various things like that. None of this is things that you need to be worrying about in your planning for your day. You're busy enjoying it, but it just educates you as to an idea of the sort of expertise that you're investing in a photographer, so that you've got the best notion of how you're going to end up with those really elegant heirloom photographs to look back on for years to come.
Lately I have had trouble sleeping, so I stay up late at night in a room lit by the TV light. All I want is to get some shut-eye, but my thoughts are keeping me awake. I don't know what it is, but it's been like this ever since we kissed. I don't know what to do, 'cause I long for you every single night. It's been like this ever since we kissed. I try my best to keep my mind occupied so that I can.
So as an idea of the sort of thing I'm talking about in regard to picking out areas inside where there are pockets of beautiful window light, think about me or your photographer shooting from below to make use of this, and I'll demonstrate from above and how that might fall on you in a moment. So even what might seem harsh on a grey day like today, if you are looking at it in this regard, can become something really elegant if used by reversing it and shooting from behind. For example, from here, you're going to be able to get hold of some sort of lighting from the window whereby you can sculpt the face with light and shadow and get a really moody, evocative piece. In the same spot, we can then look at taking some shots from above, down here, and have the bride here. I particularly like the way that the light falls in a particular spot on the wall here, and you can see the shadow line there where it falls and where it drops off would just make for the most elegant lighting on a bride's dress. So if we take a look at the sort of suites that you might use for bridal preparation, your parents' stay, the groomsmen, this is the Yorkshire suite which is open today to look at. Look at this absolutely lovely roll-top bath. I would love to have something like this at home. And equally the decor around the whole house, which was renovated 11 years ago, is just absolutely beautiful. So you've got here one of the suites that you might use, this being the Yorkshire. We're going to have a look at the Saltmarshe suite as well. They've all got relatively local names, like the Beverley. There are others which I'm not sure of the meaning of, the Watson and various others, but you can see the sort of bridal prep area that you might make use of. Equally, in terms of demonstrating the things that I want to talk about in regard to how you might make use of lighting of this sort, you can see here how you can sculpt the light with these wonderful shuttered windows. The blind's partway down here at the moment in front of the bathtub, and that just serves to demonstrate how the light falls, which isn't your job to think about on your wedding day. That's my job, of course, but it shows you how by closing things down you can really sculpt light and shadow for some gorgeous black and white portraits of brides at windows, grooms at windows, or in terms of using sheer or muslin curtains like these, you can utilise those by closing down for that moodier look if that's something you're after, or if you want exactly the opposite, you can actually get yourself really quite close and then use the proximity to the window to really get distinct lighting on your subject. So I'm still sitting here in the same window, but the one that we looked at earlier, and hopefully this serves to illustrate the sort of thing that I'm talking about, that even where you just see a window with a curtain and it might seem even quite dim in a particular setting, things that seem unlikely can make for really beautiful flattering lighting like this, where from this side of my face we've got the soft, large light source. The closer you are to a light source, the larger it is, the softer and more flattering the light, whereby I can turn toward it and you'd get the flattering shot that is something for a bride, or you might close the curtains down a good deal more and turn away for the kind of sculpted shadow that makes for perhaps a more masculine groom shot, even in a space that can seem quite dimly lit or just different in that regard from here, just by finding the window light. You'll notice here a distinct and rapid fall off in focus as a result of the f1.8 aperture that I'm using. I mentioned that earlier with regard to whether you wanted to show more background context or not. You'll spot on some of these that in some of those earlier shots my glasses are focused at the forefront of the image and already falling out of focus toward the back. That might be an aesthetic that you're keen on, that lovely dreamy portraiture look of, or you might prefer something with a more deep depth of field. That's absolutely fine and purely a subjective matter of preference. Even somewhere that seems relatively unlikely, you've got this warm light from the lamp versus the cooler light from the natural light of the window. Even a spot that seems quite unlikely as you walk down this corridor, all it is the connecting corridor between bedroom, bathroom and the study. But this kind of pool of light here can make for a really flattering shot. That kind of lighting can become really flattering for something like this, or for a full-length portrait, perhaps over the shoulder of the bride.
I try my best to keep my mind occupied, so that's on anything but you. 'Cause all I want is to get some shut-eye, but The thought of you is keeping me up.
Just see how pockets of light along this corridor work in a really similar way. So you've got a totally different aesthetic in this room, but at the same time, equally, you might use shuttered areas like this for another example of that kind of beautiful shutter. And by getting close to the window, really elegant, flattering light for your portraits.
I don't know what it is, but it's been like this ever since we kissed. I don't know what to do, 'cause I long for you every single night. I don't know what it is, but it's been like this ever since we kissed. I don't know what to do, 'cause I long for you every single night, and it's been like this ever since we.
So here in the library, you might have your guests relax, you might get your teas and coffees, you might send them off to the bar, but what's a really lovely feature here is that this shuttered window actually opens up and acts like a door. So you've got this runner here on the floor, and this actually opens up so that you've got a thoroughfare to your outside party as well. So here we have the morning room, which is one of the indoor options for the ceremony space, but you could just as easily be choosing to have your ceremony in several outdoor spaces too. And then out from the doors from the morning room, where you might opt for an indoor ceremony, you have the terrace, which I suspect is the most popular option for the outdoor reception for the evening and wedding breakfast. So moving on from the terrace area, you've got this seating area here, and you can turn up to the left here toward the bar, or you've got the opening walkway that I mentioned earlier, whereby you are able to open up the window into a doorway and have a thoroughfare to your party outside. So as an example, this wall of Saltmarshe Hall is actually east facing. So when it comes to your portraits at sunset, perhaps you're having a summertime event, and sunset is falling, let's say circa 9:30, which is where it's going to set today, and we're on the 11th of July right now, you might decide to use, with the fact that this is east facing, the sun is going to be setting in this direction over toward the west, rather than, if I turn over here, if I aim for about there, which I think is where the estuary and the Ouse are starting to meet, then we're facing almost due east. So roughly speaking, this wall's east facing. So now that I'm back to roughly speaking now facing west, you can see the, forgive my changes in exposure because I'm videoing, not photographing, but up there, if the clouds are breaking through the sky, we'd have the sunset in that direction. This might give us an example of what I was talking about, of what looks on the surface to be somewhere slightly more mundane, but actually being really useful for beautiful portraiture planning. Because if we were to photograph the two of you here against this wall, somewhere on this ground and across here in general would be in open shade during sunset, but at some point or other the shade on the floor here is going to meet with a boundary for where the shade stops and the sunlight and the golden glow of the sunset comes through. And if we then position yourself on that boundary, then you'll be able to create something that ultimately becomes a really useful way of getting just the right kind of natural lighting. I'm not saying that that's what's happening now particularly, but in those circumstances, that's the kind of planning that we're after. So if in that scenario we then have the sun setting behind us, behind the building, and we're now facing roughly toward the east, we've decided where the boundary is of that light meeting shadow on the ground, and then that leads us to our lighting scenario where we have a natural reflector to be flattering on us and the sandstone behind us. We can take a look at a couple of examples here of how we might do that with a greater depth of field and take in the context of the house, or a lesser depth of field for shallow depth and that kind of really beautiful portraiture. At this point it might be worthwhile looking at a couple of other examples, given that the sunlight wasn't playing ball as much at Saltmarsh. Here you've got this couple at another event that I shot who, in the first example, were looking straight into the sunlight, squinting. The light isn't as flattering, it's casting shadows under the nose, whereas asking them to get up, turn their chairs around and be backlit gives them this much more flattering open shade on the face, whilst also casting this beautiful hair light or rim light around the top of the head, being backlit from the sun behind, which is an example of what I was talking about in the car at the beginning of this video, and just now talking about that boundary of sunlight and shadow on the ground meeting with lighting at sunset from behind, even with a sandstone wall or any other scenario. And here's exactly the same principle applying with backlighting in a beautiful bridal shot. So there are a whole host of fantastic outdoor spaces here that you might use for your ceremony. You've got the walled garden, which we're coming to a little later, and the tree-lined avenue and the swimming pool area. The former of those two could well be somewhere that you choose for your ceremony. So there's all manner of different places in the walled garden that you might use. Or indeed spots where you might decide that you particularly want to have your ceremony, including potentially down these tree-lined avenues. Or not the tree-lined avenues, but this walled garden. Again, we've got another west-facing wall here, or rather a wall toward the west. It's east-facing, which would be useful to you in regard to having a beautiful backdrop. You might want foliage for that backdrop. Be aware, I'm doing this to give you a bit of education on how you might go about this, but of course none of this thought and planning is something that needs to be your job. You're enjoying your wedding day, of course, but it gives you an idea of the sorts of places that you might choose for the best possible lighting. That's my expertise, that's my job, but it gives you an idea of what you're investing in your wedding photographer for the most elegant heirloom moments that you'll be looking on for hopefully years to come.